I've asked them to place a moratorium on moving forward with Libra. We don't have a regulatory agency to oversee who they are and what they're doing. This is like starting a bank without having to go through any steps to do it. And of course, we have some questions about Facebook and some of the ways that it has conducted itself in the past. But they're creating their own cryptocurrency. They're going to be located in Switzerland. It's going to be an alternative to the dollar. And so, yes, I think it's very important for them to stop right now what they're doing so that we can get a handle on this. We have not held any hearings. We've got to protect consumers. We don't know who all's involved in this. We know that there are about 27 other companies in this network. And we're talking about big companies that are involved with them where they will all be, an alternative to the dollar. So this is serious, and we must ask them for a moratorium.
So, Chair Waters, cryptocurrencies have now for a while been somewhat of an enigma for regulators. The SEC has sort of taken charge of them as an investment security. We've seen some work from the CFTC on anti-money laundering, but really nobody from a regulatory perspective has a handle on this. So what's taken so long on that front? Why now?
Well, I don't know, but the fact of the matter is you're absolutely correct. There's a consent order from the FTC. HUD, has had them under investigation about what they have done in dealing with discrimination in housing is what it amounts to. And so you have just basically identified what is wrong with not having a regulatory agency overseeing them. We've got to protect our consumers. We just can't allow them to go to Switzerland with all of its associates and begin to, compete with the dollar without having any regulatory regime that's dealing with them. And so we're asking them to please place a moratorium on their actions until we have an opportunity to hold our hearings, both on the House side and the Senate side. And of course, they have got to deal with some of the other issues that have been identified about them. They're in control of huge data and how they're using that data. One of the things we understand is that they have allowed that to be used with the Russians in the latest, campaign that we had in this country. And so there are a lot of issues with Facebook, and Facebook is, under investigation. HUD, again, is concerned about the way that they have conducted themselves on the internet that basically redlined out whole communities that they did not want to see their advertising. So we need to get a handle on this. And no matter what has not been done, now is the time. We've got to do it, and we should ask them, as we're doing, or force them in any way that we can to place a moratorium on this new cryptocurrency that they are putting into place.
I was actually asking about cryptocurrency regulation, but you bring up the fact that Facebook also hasn't been really properly regulated. It seems like both of these issues have been a little complex for Congress to really get a handle on.
Well, I do know that they were before the Senate and that a lot of questions were raised about them, and perhaps there was not a lot of understanding. But regardless to what has not happened, we've got to get a handle. Facebook now is under scrutiny. There's a consent order out from FTC. And so we are looking at their practices. We're looking at the way that they do business. And while we're doing that, they have moved on to develop this cryptocurrency and to organize in Switzerland out from any scrutinies that perhaps we should be having on them. And so we're now going to move, and we're going to move aggressively and very quickly to deal with what is going on with this new cryptocurrency that they're creating.
Chair Waters, we have the bank stress tests taking place over the next week, and their capital return programs to be announced next Thursday. It is widely expected by the analyst community that all of the 18 banks being tested will pass the stress test and go on to announce capital return plans that could see buybacks and dividends as much as 100% of their earnings. Do you think that's the right use of their earnings?
No, I don't. And you know that we're concerned about that. We had a hearing this year, which we had not had in 10 years, with, the 10 CEOs of all of the large banks. And we are asking them about, their practices. And we're trying to make sure that they conform with some of what we required in Dodd-Frank and all of that. And so we're working aggressively to deal with oversight and our own responsibility for our banks and our big financial institutions. And no, we don't think the buybacks are in the best interest of the investors. So we're taking a look at that.
Well, I mean, it is of the interest of the investors, though, Chair Waters, to see those stock buybacks. But you said you're working with them to make sure they conform to Dodd-Frank. These are the Dodd-Frank stress tests. So if they pass them, are they not permitted to do as they like with their capital?
No, we do have requirements for stress testing. And for almost 5 years, most of them had not passed their stress test. But they corrected themselves and they've done better. And I think most of them now have passed the stress test. And there's some who would like us to get rid of the stress test altogether, but we're not going to do that. The stress test, as we put together in Dodd-Frank reforms, will still be in place, and we still expect them to be able to pass the stress test.
Wanted to ask you, Congresswoman, about someone who regularly testifies before your committee, Jay Powell, the Fed chairman. Recently, President Trump has really upped his attacks against him, called for lower interest rates, called for him to go for easier money and stimulus. The Fed chairman indicated he's going that direction, but didn't do so, and there have been reports that he's looking at demoting him. In your view, would that be legal, and would that be appropriate?
Well, first of all, the President of the United States is totally inappropriate. There should be no interference with the Feds at all. The Feds have tremendous data, they have a lot of information, and they are very, very focused on what to do about monetary policy. The president has no business interfering, but this is typical of the president. He doesn't respect the laws. He thinks he's above the laws. He doesn't respect the Constitution. And so he is trying to take control of the Feds and tell them how to conduct their business. It is outrageous. It should not be done. And I think so far, Powell is holding his own, and he's resisting what the president is attempting to do. And the Congress of the United States needs to continually say to the President of the United States, get out of this. This is none of your business. You cannot run the Fed.
Chair Waters, we spoke before, you and I, about Wells Fargo shortly after Tim Sloan announced his departure. They still haven't filled the CEO role since then. Is that something that concerns you, and are there any particular characteristics you'd like to see in the next leader of Wells Fargo?
Well, absolutely, we should be concerned about it, and it would be in the best interest of everyone if they could have filled that position quickly. However, I think there may be some reticence by those who could perhaps fill that position because of the culture that had been developed inside of Wells Fargo. And so it's not easy. And Wells Fargo, of course, is just too big to manage. And so I think that this is getting in the way of them being able to find a CEO who's willing to step into it. But they're going to keep looking, and they will eventually get someone. I would like it to be done sooner than later, but it is taking some time. Of course, yes, Wells Fargo still presents us a problem because until a new CEO perhaps gets in there and is able to undo the culture that has developed over the years, we may be presented with some of the same problems that they presented to us, such as making out, accounts in people's names that they didn't know about, forced insurance, some of those things. We're looking at that. We're trying to monitor that as closely as we can. But Wells Fargo emerged as the very kind of bank that we have to be sure that we regulate and that we do not allow to develop in the way that they have done. We have fined them over and over again, and it has just been the cost of doing business, and we cannot allow that to continue to happen in the banking community.